Welcome back, man. This is Kirk.
Going on, guys? Kevin. So I'm going to lead this one off a little bit differently than the other times because we're going to talk about how to make time for literally everything. So with this podcast, Kirk and I have had to restructure our schedules individually to kind of make things happen, right? We all have our personal lives. He has work, he got kids, I have work, I have kids, I have another YouTube channel that I run. So we were talking about making time, and more specifically, Kirk was talking about making time for this and how much time, it essentially is going to take for us to make this podcast better or successful, and how much time we're actually going to have to devote to it. So we were having a little bit of conversation on how to do that, and I figured that we would literally talk about it here because I think other people can benefit from having this conversation, and just kind of hearing us talk about the importance of a schedule. So that's pretty much the reason why we're here and what we're going to talk about: how to make time for everything. So, Kirk, for you, what's a schedule?
Simply put, simply defined is how to plan your time, where your time is going to be spent. I would say that time is currency, right? And if you learn how to build a budget for your time to where you can spend it, where it's going to be most impactful, to ensure that you meet your deadlines, whatever those deadlines may be. Um, can't get much simpler than that. It's way more complicated to execute.
It is. It really is. This is one of those like key unlocks that I didn't realize was a very important tool until I literally saw how much I was leaving on the table by not having structure. And I was personally the type of person that preferred not having structure. But now that I'm trying to achieve stuff, like I see that structure is the only real way to go. For me, a schedule is literally just like you said, man. It's the what you need to get done and the order that you need to get done. It's your plan for the day to achieve the things that you want to achieve. But part of the thing that people don't understand about schedules, which I 100% did not understand about a schedule, is it only works when you schedule what you really want, right? So to get the results, you need to do certain things. And a lot of the times people build stuff into their schedule that is not heading in the right direction. So from a work perspective, I know you have this on lock. And one of the things that we were kind of talking about last week was like, or that I was thinking about last week was simply like, you said that you needed to work on building more time for this. When in my head, I know you from a professional standpoint. I'm like, dude, you know how to make a fucking schedule. Like, I understand that you know how to get the things done in work. It's just a matter of applying it to our personal lives, which I think a lot of people actually struggle with. So, from a work perspective, very similar, and this is a question for you specifically, is what is like, how do you go about processing your work schedule? Like, what does work schedule actually look like to you outside of personal goals and achievements?
From a work perspective, man, I think for me specifically, I'm very routine driven.
Yeah.
And like everything is planned on a certain day. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, my off day. And I balance like what needs to be done so that way I can dedicate focused time to each category, right?
Yeah.
In the past, when you're managing multiple businesses at one time, um, if you don't plan out that time, of course, you're not going to get the knowledge that's needed to execute and to win in each area. So I don't want to say like I'm not militant structured because I still leave room for I call it flex time or spontaneity, where things are going to
Yeah.
happen randomly that you're going to have to take care of urgently. But a majority of my time at work is structured. It's very planned out. It's planned out for 30 days. I know what I'm doing on, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And even if I'm not all there, like if I'm preoccupied mentally with something going on, something important came on, like I will stop what I'm doing and I will stick to that plan. Even if it's only for 30 minutes and normally I plan out 2 hours, like I still stick to that plan. Whether it's 100% or 50%, just because I don't want to go backwards. And then if it's something that I need to delete and completely wipe off, then I can delete it and I can reschedule it because I do leave time for flexibility. If something popped up, if a deadline popped up that I need to execute with my boss and he calls me and says, "Hey, dude, we've got a fire drill. I need to execute. I need you to get this back to me by 2 o'clock today." And it's 11 o'clock and it's going to take me 2 hours to get it done. I'll cancel that time out and I have a flex day or flex time where I can rebook that time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So what the like because this is something that a lot of people are good at, and at work it's probably due to an obligation. There's a lot of built-in work structure that's, to be successful at whatever work or job you have to do certain things. So a lot of people, it's just easy to do it at work. When it comes to our personal lives, me, like, I'm talking about myself specifically, like, I don't think about my personal schedule the same way that I do my work schedule. What do you think, like, what's the hell's the reason behind that? Because really it's the same thing. It's just like when you think about it from work, people do it, and when you think about it on a personal level, it's just for some reason there's a disconnect there that people just don't get.
Let me start with this, right? The reason why I found this topic to be interesting
Yeah.
was because, like, I heard a podcast a few weeks ago, and I don't recall who it was, but it was along the lines of most people will execute professionally at a much higher level than they will personally, right? And that comes down to
Yeah.
whether it's managing expenses, managing deadlines, achieving a sales budget, achieving, a P&L or a profitability budget. Like, you just execute. And then when it comes to home life, they don't, right? So, the content of what I heard the other day or a few weeks ago that kind of got me thinking a little bit was like, man, when you can manage your personal life the same way you manage your work life, like, that's the true unlock. That takes you to an entirely different level. And I think most people look at, like, the result at work. There's an accountability factor. You're going to be held
Yeah.
accountable to your boss, regardless, right? Where we don't hold ourselves accountable at home, or we don't have anybody that holds us accountable at home. And that could be a friend, a peer, a significant other. We don't treat our spouse the same way that we treat, our peers, for good reason, right? That's not injectable in this specific scenario, but it kind of is when you look at, like, you've got to stay accountable to yourself for your significant other. Your partner's time is just as important. And this is where I fail, right? So the reason why, again, I'll say another reason why I'm interested in this topic conversation is that I don't balance my time well. I've gotten much better at it over the years, but it's taken me a lot longer to get better at it personally than it did professionally. As I've gotten older and I've heard it from my kids and I've heard it from my wife a little bit more, as quickly as I moved up the ranks at work, I didn't do the same thing at home when it came to balancing. Right. My true unlock that I'm trying to get better at is not just focusing on me personally, as hardcore as I do my job, but also, those that are impacted by me, such as my wife and my kids. So I don't know what the answer is on why, other than I would just speculate it just comes from external versus internal accountability, to be honest with you. Most people cannot hold themselves accountable by themselves, and that's where discipline comes in, while they need somebody else to hold them accountable, and that's their bills and their job. If they don't have a job, they can't pay their bills. If they don't can't pay their bills, they don't have a house. Things will fall apart. So that comes from the external accountability versus, those of us that can stay true to who we are and discipline ourselves. That's a whole nother unlock and a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I agree. The point that I would add to that is, like, again, I kind of speak from my perspective, is I never at work when it came to achieving results, it was very clear and already pretty much structured, right? When you come into a role that someone else has had before, because we're talking about a job, right? We're not talking about creating your own business. When you come into a role that someone else has had before, you have a structure literally built in that, hey, this is what needs to get done on this day. This is what needs to get done on this day. This is what needs to get done on this day. And when it comes to our personal lives, very few of us have had someone to kind of teach us, and again, me particularly, like, how to structure my life to achieve the things that I want to achieve. Right. I never had anybody sit down and say, hey, like, what is it that you want to achieve in 10 years? What do you need to do now, today, to get there? And there's a big disconnect between the goal and where we are now and how to get there. Because part of the, like, for me, as I was looking to achieve more, my time became less available because I'm spending a lot more time simply doing all of the things that I want to do. I had to build a schedule to get everything that I needed to get done, right? I'm the type of person that would love to sleep in, just be as spontaneous as possible, not have anything structured. I personally got to a point where I realized that the days that I woke up at 8, 9, 10, whatever that time was, I wouldn't get shit done. So now here it is, 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. I haven't finished all the things that I need to finish for my, we'll call it business per se, but all of the other personal aspects that I wanted to achieve. Like, it could be as simply as like cutting the grass over the weekend and changing the oil for the car. If I sleep in, I don't get it done. If I wake up, I get it done. Right. And that pain point became too clear to where, like, now I have to, like, if I'm going to get stuff done and I want to achieve a lot of things, which I do, I need to have specific time that I work on literally everything. Kind of why we're here. So
I would add to it, man. Like, the reason why I'm here and the reason why I want to become more effective, all right, is
yeah,
I strongly believe, like, I think a lot of people don't reach their true potential only because life does get extremely busy. To your point, you mentioned it
yeah,
earlier, but like, we've got kids, we've got baseball practice, we've got, a significant other that we spend time with, plus our work, and we've got to balance all of that, things around the house. And I think there comes a time where certain people, they reach that level where they don't want to take on anymore because they don't have time. And that's their excuse, right? And listen, we all have excuses, every one of us. So when I say this, I'm looking in the mirror and I'm not looking through the window right now. We've all got excuses that hold us back. So for me, I've heard, got at, podcast after podcast, I've listened to people, CEOs and executives and head coaches, in sports. Like, you hear them tell you, like, you don't want my life because you couldn't handle it. We just see the glory and the fame that comes with it and the paycheck, right? But when you look at how everything is structured, what they sacrifice or what they give up, it comes down to, the fundamentals of time management, the execution to optimize their schedule. And the healthy ones are able to balance their professional life and their personal life. And for us, like, my wife keeps on, joking, and my kids too. Like, as we've grown as a family, life hasn't slowed down. It's the exact opposite. I know, like, years ago, listen, we've moved 5 states in 5 years, right? So, and the old, I don't want to call it a joke, but the old saying was like, hey, eventually life's going to slow down one day. Like, we're going to slow down and be able to settle in. And then we'd slow down and settle in after 6 months later. And then boom, we get a phone call. We're moving somewhere. Something else happened. Something fell apart. Like, it's just constant. So the key today, at least for me, and where I'm at with this, is like, how do I? It's only going to continue to get busier. We're going to scale. We're going to do other things. We want to run a business. We want to start this podcast and really get it up and going. There's all kinds of things that are going to happen in life. And the only way that we can have the illusion of time and more time is going to be optimization of scheduling and to balance what we need to balance, ensure we are clear and aligned on our priorities, and then getting rid of the garbage that we need to get rid of that stop us, and create excuses for us.
I agree with that 100% wholeheartedly, especially like with the stuff that I'm trying to achieve. It's the more you do, the less time you have, but the more you can get done, which is really interesting. I'm sure you feel that way too. Like the more you've progressed, the more you've been able to do in everything. It's not just one thing. Like, you haven't like taken, brought the bar up here to lower the bar here, but you've been able to a certain level, like, bring everything up at the same time. And you brought up a very important point about balance. So I do actually have a question about this. To balance your schedule, right? What does that actually mean to you as an individual? Because this can mean very different things for very different people, right? But for you specifically, what is balance? And then I'll feel I can answer this afterwards as well.
I mean, when I look at balance, it's finding out what's most important to you. And I'll quote I'll always fuck up quotes, by the way. I'm just going to be honest with you. But I'll quote Matthew McConaughey. There's a video that I've watched on numerous
Yeah.
occasions that I like, and he talks about buckets. And he's got his
Yeah.
buckets like family, fatherhood, husband, friends, and career. All
Yeah.
right. So those are your 5 buckets. And what he uses is he calls the debit system or the credit system. So when you spend money or you spend time, you're essentially adding to one bucket, and you're putting your currency right there, but you're also losing something from one of the other 4. Whether if you spend more time in your career, you're then going into the red and losing value in the other 4 buckets. And you're always going to lose. You're always going to, if you're going to go into the career aspect and you're going to dive in for a little bit of time, it's going to require more currency, right? Your time. So you're going to put more time into that, and you're going to lose value in the other 4 buckets. And when you do that, you have to make sure that they're full. So when you do lose, it's a progression over time. And then when they go into the red, now you're in the overdraft section where it's going to cost you time. And if their consequences, one of those 4 have been impacted, that's now going to require damage control, is the way that I interpret it. He didn't say it like that, but that's how I interpret it. So
Yeah.
for me, if I feel like I need to spend more time with my wife because I have not spent a lot of time with her, I am intentional and I do recognize it. So I do things for her, and whether it's helping around the house, whether it's spending time with quality time with her and being very intentional at that time, whether it's the kids, whether it's my friends. Like I'm not I don't have it down to a science quite yet, but I am very self-aware of it, and I am continuing to find ways to self-regulate it, so where I can, like, hey man, if I haven't talked to you or Chris or some of my other buddies in quite some time, like I'll just send a note like, hey man, thinking about you, what's up? Right now, granted, I'm not very lengthy in my words and I don't have a lot of room for small talk. At least I struggle with that aspect of myself.
Yeah.
I'm aware of it, right? So I look at those 5 buckets. Where do I need to put my energy? Because you can't balance them all at the same time. It is nearly impossible. And then if I get too low on one topic of conversation, whether it's the kids or the wife, etc., then I can go back and fill that bucket back up. Right. The choice is just making sure I can balance it so I don't have any negative consequences to repair that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I actually wanted to add to the same like balance topic is a lot of people don't know what balance is for them. There's like because I didn't know what it was. This has been clear to me as I've needed it. But I mean, 5 years ago, I couldn't tell you what balance was for me. I didn't know that I needed this amount of time to relax. I needed this amount of time to like not be in thought, right? I needed to sit down and just like zone out for something for a minute, just like watch TV, watch a movie to get some sort of clarity in the brain, right? It's not just about how you balance the different things that you want to do, but how you can actually recharge yourself. Literally, sleep is part of your schedule. It has to be like rest time, time to educate yourself, time to grow in other things. It's like from what I used to think about a schedule, me personally, was literally like, hey, between work, I'm at this time and this time, and then everything else is just like free time for me to enjoy myself. Right. That was it. And I had that schedule locked in for work. When in reality, there's a lot of other time that I've had to start building in. So for me, one of those things was building in time for personal growth. There was a long time, and this was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, where I actually had time to read. I actually had time to study. I actually had time to sit back and grow. And that may have been periodic for about 6 months while I was pushing something very intently. But it all needed to work in such a way that I didn't burn out, right? And for me, that's what balance ends up being. Like how, yes, you have the buckets, yes, you have the different amount of time, but there's something that needs to get built in there to not burn out, to be able to keep it going. Because you can schedule 12 hours of work, but at the end of the day, like, are you going to be able to sustain that for an extended period of time? Right? What the fuck do you eat? Like, when do you eat? How do you eat? When it comes to work, like 9 to 5, that's all stuff that's kind of already built into your schedule. But what happens on weekends, right? When you don't have that work, or what happens after work when you don't have that, hey, I go to lunch at this particular time. Like, how do you keep up your diet? How do you keep up your nutrition? So there's a bunch of aspects of balance that I didn't even think about. Like, I just did it, right? I had, oh, I'm hungry, I got to eat, but not like, hey, what time do I eat after I get off work to keep that similar, every single day, to keep up a certain level of diet. So there was so many aspects that I don't even think I was mentally prepared 5 years ago to even think about half of this shit, because I didn't have it figured out, man. Like, I knew the check boxes that I needed to survive, but I didn't know the check boxes that I needed to even like thrive, to begin to grow. There was just a bunch of shit that I was doing aimlessly without a purpose. And I've had to build a schedule to make time for that.
That's a good point. I didn't look at the burnout. I think about burnout, but I didn't look at factoring in burnout time. Now, I guess for me, my wife and I have this debate all the time, man. Like, there are moments that I feel burnt out. They're not frequent. And the only reason
Yeah.
why I would say that is only because I think that's just a matter of perspective. For me at least, and granted, there are times where I do feel, and it's a couple times a year where I'm just exhausted a little bit, but like, we had this debate the other day about stress, and she keeps on saying that, you work in a high stress environment. I'm like, the definition of stress to me is doing something you don't enjoy. Like, if you
Yeah.
enjoy your life and your process, then you're not really stressed out. You're just in a high octane environment. So for me, burnout is the same way. Like, I don't look at work as work, just because I do enjoy what I do. Now, granted, it's not the end goal for me. I would like to have my own business and other forms of making money to where, I report to myself and myself only in that environment. But at the same time, like, I just don't look at it like, for me, it's just all growth, man. It's all about the journey, not the destination. So I don't look at it like that. I don't want to say I don't allow that word to not be in my vocabulary, because I'm not perfect at it, and that's where I
Yeah.
segued into that. But like, I don't view it that way. I just look at the journey itself, and just kind of feel myself out. If I need to take some time to mindlessly scroll or to numb my brain for a little bit, then I will, here or there. But I don't know. I just enjoy the chapter of life that I'm in right now. If that makes any sense at all.
No, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. So, with this actual topic being how the hell we're going to make time for this podcast, for me on an editing perspective, for both of us on a planning perspective, what what do you think about when building in something new to your actual schedule? So we're going to go with, obviously, you guys that are here watching, how can we provide some information to them essentially about what we're going through and how we're kind of making it work, right? We both got work, we both have families, we both have things that we're trying to achieve separate from this. From your perspective, how are you building in time for this?
There's two things that I look at, man. The first thing is the operating system, which is your current process and your current platform that you're running as a person, right? So that's, for me, I like to paint pictures, and that's the easiest way for me to understand and digest it. If you're going to add something new into your daily rhythm, right? And Atomic Habits is a great book. I know you and I chatted about this previously, but
Yeah.
there's really not a dead set amount of time that it's going to take you to inject a new habit. I think he quotes it. It's anywhere from like 18 days to 235 days or something like that. And the reason why he has that large spread is because if you're a product of the environment or a product of a habit, and you've been doing the same thing for years, it's going to require a lot more energy and effort to add something new, versus something that maybe you just started a year ago. It may not take you as long to change that. And a lot of us, and where that's most impactful, is because for a lot of us, we are a creature of the environment that we were in for 18 years of our life.
Yeah.
So when you look at being raised by your parents, you, whether you knew it or not, subconsciously took their behaviors, their habits, whether they were good habits, whether they were bad habits, or you said, I'm not going to be my parents. So you went ditch to ditch to do something else. That was created over a lot of time. In order to
Yeah.
break that, it's easier to break things as you're coming out of that time frame than it is for you to say, okay, I'm 50 years old. I've been doing this for 50 years or 25 years. it's going to take me a little bit longer, right? So like you're going to have to like reset your operating system. And the first thing I would say to that is you got to believe that you can do it. Because when you look at the reality that you are in, it's all about changing how you see yourself. So if you want to see yourself doing this new behavior and this new structure, you're gonna have to look at yourself a little bit differently. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of it is it's going to be completely based on environment. So I think you need to set up your environment to create the success you want to see. And I'll give you an example of how I do it. Where I struggle with this is when I'm on the road because I travel a lot for work, but at home, like I keep my supplements out on the counter, right? So when I walk into my kitchen, I come around into a backwards L, and I've got my super greens because I hate eating vegetables. Just being honest with you, number one. Number two, I fast a lot, so I'll go segmented times without eating, or I'll only eat dinner and I only eat meat. So I do have supplements on the counter right there. So every morning when I walk over there, I've got my supplements, I've got my protein, and boom, that's like my habit that I have every morning, right? And that's when I'm at home. Now, where I struggle when I'm on the road is because my environment shifts a lot, my hotel shifts a lot. So that's like the unlock that I'm having to try to create. So I'm learning how to leverage that to my advantage now, where I'm trying to then set up my environment in that hotel room and take things with me that would like trigger, oh, I got to do that. So it's all about triggering my mind in that different environment, or shock therapy, whatever you want to call it. So that way I can cue myself to that habit that I'm trying to create, right? So like if I'm going to create a better time management skill, I'm going to have to set up something a little bit differently and change the environment in order to inject this new want into my life, or this new habit into my life. So it's all subjective based on how you want to change it. But I would say something needs to change today, whether it's your phone screen, whether it's your wallpaper, whether it's the widget on your phone, whether it's putting a calendar on your desk, putting a calendar by your bedside. So when you look over, you're like, oh, hey, there's my calendar for today. Like something's got to cue you to go into that new habit. And that's got to be your environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Atomic Habits, for any of you guys that haven't read it, it is very insightful on literally this. It goes into a thing called habit stacking, where if you have something that you do already and you want to have a new habit, you essentially do it with that thing that you already do, right? So if you wake up in the morning and brush your teeth and you want to start flossing, for example, you brush your teeth, you set the floss out, like Kirk said, you put it there next to your toothbrush. Now you grab your toothbrush, brush your teeth. When you go put it back, oh, there's my floss. Now I need to do it. Bop. And now it's in there. It's in your schedule. Obviously, that's a weird example. You should floss. But
No,
separate from that, there is a stacking that you can do. And the other one is actually replacement. So I want to take this out. I want to do this. So when I would do the thing that I want to remove, now I do the other thing. And it's literally just like, hey, when I was going to sit down and watch TV, instead of sitting down and watching TV, I'm now going to read this book, right? So instead of doing the bad habit, now you do the good habit. And it goes into a lot of details. I would definitely highly recommend that book. It goes a lot into what you can do with your schedule. But about the schedule, why are we here? Obviously, we need to build time into our schedules. We've discussed that a little bit. But do you have any techniques for schedule building that you think would benefit somebody watching?
I don't have anything other than building a schedule as a technique. Um,
Okay.
I mean, listen, I can tell you what I just started, right? And it's simply that, like, I've got a schedule for work, obviously, and I go back to the quote that I said earlier. We spend a lot more time trying to book out our time for work, or whatever it may be. We have, accountability metrics at work and expectations at work. So we execute them, right? And we spend a lot of time getting really good at work. So for me, I'm going to spend a lot of time getting really good at Kirk, and the byproduct of that, I will only become stronger at work. So I think like we look at the equation backwards. So one of my bosses gave me a quote, and I hope this will make sense. And what I'm trying to convey right now is like a lot of times we start with the result, and then we look at, hey, result equals behavior and process. So subliminally, we have created a subconscious mindset that says the result is most important. And then we try to reverse engineer our way backwards, right? So now it's like he's like, dude, it's all about the behavior and the process. If you get the behavior correct, if you get the process correct, you're going to get the result that you desire. So because we always, and I love the quote, begin with the end in mind. Like I'm fully aware of that. And I get that. I heard that from another one of my mentors. And there is an end game, but we've got to be very careful on how we place that end game. Otherwise, that's going to impact the in between. So for me, the behavior and the process is I'm just going to start scheduling my time. And why I'm saying this is you're going to fail at it. I know I'm going to fail at it. I failed at it last week. I was on vacation last week, so I didn't put a lot of time and energy into it, but I did like, hey, I'm going to schedule time for the podcast to research notes. Hey, I'm going to schedule time to take, the wife and I for us to go on a date, right? I'm going to schedule time for workout sessions a little bit more. I'm going to be a little bit more specific on my personal schedule. And I
Yeah.
already set up like, hey, work schedule, different tab, personal schedule, different tab. And then what I've got to look at is the tweaks or the fails because you're going to fail a lot.
Oh
And
yeah.
you can't get like hardcore fixated on failing. Cause I think a lot of people create a schedule and then life punches them in the face, right? And then they fail, and then that guilt or that lack of hitting the expectation festers inside of you, and like it automatically, like, man, fuck this, I don't have time for this, or I don't want to feel this way. Like, listen, failure is absolutely necessary, and you have to be very comfortable with it. So if I'm going to fail at my schedule, then I need to continue to tweak it until I can find something that works. And I also created like here's the expectation right here on one hand, and I have high expectations, but in the same breath, I'm not going to hold myself to the end goal expectation today because I need to create small wins that will build up over time to create momentum.
Dude, that is
So,
something that I didn't understand. Seriously. So from now, like I have my schedule worked out this way, but I didn't get that before. And one of the things that I personally do or thought for some reason, it's like when I build my schedule, like that's it, that's my schedule. But at the end of the day, what I've come to realize now is like my schedule's a moving target, right? What I want to achieve now may be very different from what I want to achieve 6 months from now. Yes, I have a big goal overall, but to each goal, there are steps, and each of those steps require different activities, require different things. So, my schedule is literally a moving target. So, what I personally do from my perspective to build an actual schedule is I use very generic blocks. And then in each of those blocks, I have the nuance. So, for example, wake up in the morning, go to the gym. That is a time block from when I wake up to when I go to the gym. I sometimes don't go to the gym. Sometimes I don't wake up at that time, but that block is pretty much there and it's scheduled. I have my work block from this time to this time. I do work, my real estate work. That is a large chunk of the day. And this is on my personal schedule. On my real estate schedule, I now have detailed things of what I'm going to be doing, when I'm going to be doing it. So, the big perspective, what I have on, I actually have like 4 different calendars now, but what I use on my, for example, like Microsoft Calendar is the big blocks. So I have, gym, breakfast in the morning, work. Then I have time for editing, and then I have the little bit of R&R time at the end of the day. So those are my kind of blocks that I'm in throughout the day. And then for each individual thing, now I have whatever I need to do to achieve those goals. So the way that I actually look at it is like, what's the big thing that I want to achieve? For me, there's 4 major things that come with, we'll call it work. So there's obviously the real estate portion of it. There's this podcast, YouTube, there's self-education, and then there is the family time that I need to build into pretty much each of the schedules. And I have those scheduled. They're there, they're on a block. How I decide to do with those times, that's what changes, right? So that's what I actually didn't understand. Like I thought that if I made a schedule, that's what I was going to stick with for the rest of life. But in reality, like you were saying, each of those buckets require different time. So I may be able to allocate, I don't know, an hour a day, let's just say, for dedicated family time, but I may have 3 hours, I may have 4 hours in the future, or I may have less time, whatever that
right.
is. So literally just adjusting that time and knowing that that's not going to make a big difference has been a huge, I would say, unlock for me, just because it doesn't matter. Like the schedule has to fit what you're doing now and what you want to achieve in the future. The tasks that you do is what you want to achieve in the future, but the things that you need to do on a daily basis are not 100% set in stone. They're based off of the objective that you're trying to achieve. They're based on the bucket that you're trying to fill. So I didn't understand that in the past. Like I really didn't. So now it's not a big deal. Like I understand the schedule's a moving target. I understand that maybe 6 months from now, my schedule looks different. Maybe a month from now, my schedule looks different. For me, from a real estate perspective, my daily schedule looks different because sometimes I have showings, sometimes I don't. So I have to like break everything down until the big block. That's my broad schedule. Within those big blocks, then I have the little blocks of, hey, when are we recording? When am I editing? When am I doing my time for the topics, right? So I have a set time. Let's just use this for an example. We've been recording pretty much every Sunday morning. So Sunday morning, I have a time block, right? That is from, let's say, 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock in the morning. This is what we're doing, right? How I use the minutes in between there is different day to day. But this time block on Sunday is podcast research time for me, whether we're talking, whether we're not talking. Every other Sunday we're recording. Every other Sunday, I'm either sitting in front of my computer, figuring out topics, doing research, doing what I need to do. So that may change as we require more time. I may need to add 30 minutes here. I may need to add 40 minutes here. I may need to just randomly add an hour during the week for research that if I have to move something on Sunday, because very recently my son now has 4 practices a week that, a week ago I didn't have to deal with. Now my whole schedule has to change, obviously, to accommodate that. But that's not going to be, for an extended period of time. That may be 3 months, that may be 4 months. So understanding that my schedule now has to change and being able to make that change has been a huge unlock.
What I would add to that, and I would add it into conclusion in that particular subject, is that, like, overall expectations. I think that we as individuals have really high expectations because we
Yeah.
see, and I've said this on multiple episodes so far, is like we see Hollywood highlight reels on Instagram and Facebook, and we see what other people are capable of, which creates an unrealistic expectation of what we're capable of accomplishing. And that it may have taken that individual 10 years to get there.
Yeah.
Or that individual, is very structured and they sleep 4.5 hours a day, whatever it may be. You guys and gals have to be extremely self-aware of expectations and be able to regulate yourself in the emotional aspect of, like, hey, my end game is here. However, I'm starting from here, right? And the spread right there is 500 miles. You're going to have to take a couple steps. You're going to have to lose. You're going to have to adjust the sails on the boat here, or adjust your speed, whatever you want to call it, so that way
Yeah.
you're hyper aware and you're able to self-regulate in order to get where you need to go. I just think that we create really high expectations, and I said it earlier that we don't ever reach our true potential, only because we get some of that pressure and we don't know how to regulate it, and we don't know how to say, hey, like, I need to start scheduling my time a little bit differently. Or we fail too many times when we create that schedule, and instead of, and this is why goals, when you talk about like losing weight, whatever it may be, like we
Yeah.
have a goal in mind and we just stop, like, hey, it's not in my cards, or it's just not me, or it's in my genetics, or whatever it may be. Like, I've never felt better physically, for example, when I just said, fuck it, I don't care how much weight I'm going to lose. I'm not trying to get to a specific goal. I'm just trying to make better decisions daily.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Right. Hey, like, I'm going to fast today, or I'm only going to eat a piece of steak with no sides, or like, I don't have a specific, like, hardcore schedule. And I think that comes over time. Like, you'll get better
Yeah.
with it, and you may regress, and you'll get better, and you'll regress, and you'll get better. But overall, it's kind of like a stock chart, man. The stock goes up, it comes down a little bit, then it goes back up, then it comes down. But if you look at the 5-year spread, you notice that there's been a 40% increase year over year for the past 5 years. But we just get too fixated on the current moment and that feeling. And then we lose, and then we're like, we're done. But, like, hey, did you to travel back in time 5 years ago and see what you were like, or see what you were doing, right? And then you just have to, as you get better, then you can expedite your timelines, and you can crank the speed up a little bit, or crank the boost up a little bit, so you can progress at a much faster rate of pace. But just have the goal, begin with the end in mind, but don't put too much pressure on yourself with expectations when it comes to changing your schedule and your time management process.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I wanted to kind of get into before we go to the end, but this is titled Making Time for Everything. And in reality, you do not have time for everything. You have a lot of time for very few things if you want to achieve goals. So, one of the questions that I ask you is, what are the things that you need to give up to actually achieve what you want to achieve? Like in your personal schedule, what are some things, what are some sacrifices that you've had to make? What are some things that you've had to say no to in order to say yes to the things that are going to get you the result?
It's funny that you bring up the whole no conversation because I was listening to some content yesterday and it was just discussing when you say yes to something, you say no, you're saying no to something else. And I guess the mindset behind that is that, if you say yes, yes, yes to everything professionally, you're going to rob yourself of family time. So for me, it just comes down to, and this is a conversation I like to have next week, by the way. So just for a sneak peek, it's a lot of it comes down to like self-reflection and caring about what other people think of you. So I don't have like a specific answer on like, what have you had to say no to in general, other than maybe, and I'm probably going to fuck this up when I say this, but I've said no to caring about how people think about me because I used to just want to say yes, 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 yes to everything because I was so concerned with how people viewed me, that I didn't want them to think illy of me. And a
Yeah.
lot of people won't get this, right? And especially in my background, like I manage a lot of people. I've got multiple stores that I manage, stuff like that. And at first, when I was younger in my career, and this still bothers me to this day, by the way. So let me start with that. But when I was younger in my career, I would say yes to absolutely everything. And the reason behind that is because when I was younger on the totem pole and I didn't talk to my boss, or my district manager or regional manager didn't really acknowledge me. Like, I'm like, man, who is this guy? Like, he doesn't even acknowledge me, doesn't even say anything, doesn't follow up, whatever it may have been. I'm like, man, I don't want to be
Yeah.
that guy when I get promoted. Now, what I did realize early in my career is that saying yes to everybody, I'm going to take away from something else. So whether that's my own job, because I'm too worried about pleasing other people and responding to them,
Yeah.
and giving them content, or something that I'm literally just letting them rent space in my brain. Right. And you can't say yes to everything. Like it's just impossible, man. What you have to
Yeah.
do is you have to find a balance to it. You have to find a different way to respond. You have to find times to say no. And like I've had to explain, hey, no, I'm not going to have time for that. Or I'll give them some context on what and why, but you got to find a way to say no because you have to look at the big picture, right? So like President Eisenhower had a saying, from a speech back in 1954. He said, I have two types of problems. I've got urgent problems and I have important problems, right? The urgent is not important and the important's not urgent. What you have to figure out on the balancing scale is what is urgent that needs to be addressed today and what are some things that are important that could be addressed over time. And that could be the same thing for people. Like, hey, I need to address this today. Absolutely, let's have some dialogue. But is that energy going to be best spent on this particular item? And will you fix it? And will it be fixed in one day? Same thing with people. Like I can't respond to every email that I've gotten. And as we get larger, we're not going to be able to. Will we be able to generically paint or broad brush a question with an answer? Absolutely. You just have to be very, very aware of that, man. And for me, I'm still balancing that. And I'm still learning that today. So I don't know that I have a specific thing that I've had to sacrifice other than just the mindset of caring about other people, because I do care about them. Saying no to them
Yeah.
breaks my heart. But I also have to look at like I'm trying to do what's best for everybody and the greater good of what's trying to be accomplished, whether that may be people that I lead, my family, or just my own mental health.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And it's somewhat similar for me, but not at the same time. And the reason I say that is like the difference for me is I have my scheduled time blocks to where if you're communicating to me during that time in regards to my that time activity, for example, a real estate client calling me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I'm doing real estate work. I will answer, I will respond, right? But at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, when I'm no longer doing real estate work and I'm on a computer editing, I'm not going to respond to that person, right? That conversation, whatever they're going to message me or ask me about, that doesn't need a result or a response right then and there. So for me, it's been clarifying what the outcome of that response is going to achieve, right? If there's a lease that's going to get signed tomorrow and I need to turn in some keys, I'll respond to that, right? But if it's a, hey, I need a list of properties, well, I do the real estate work from X time to this time. So during that time, I'll respond. And sometimes I'll even just message them and say, hey, I'll get to you at this time tomorrow, right? And that's all it takes. But if I'm sitting here editing a video, I'm not going to completely stop my train of thought. I'm not going to stop my focus on editing to then refocus on real estate, because now that's going to distract me. And it goes back into one of the things that they talk about in Atomic Habits is, I don't even remember the term, but essentially what happens is when you're focused on an activity for an extended period of time and then you loop in another activity, there's about a 15-minute delay where your brain is not focused to the same level that it was. So if I'm focusing, I've been editing for an hour, I stop and respond to a text message, I cannot then refocus to the same level that I had over the course of that last hour in that, because of that text message, right? Even just stopping and looking at my phone distracts the level of focus. So now that hour that I had and I knocked out, let's just say 50% of what I needed to do, now that text message, that one text message that I respond to, it takes me 10 or 15 minutes to get back to that same level of focus. So now for that next hour, I'm not going to be able to achieve that same level of work speed because I literally derailed the train. So knowing that when I'm in the gym, I'm not answering work calls, knowing that when I'm at work, I'm not answering or focused on editing. I'm not focused on scripts. I'm not focused on what conversation we're having, and I'm focused on real estate. That allows me to achieve so much more. And what I say no to now is not necessarily based on what I feel or don't feel. It's based on what I'm doing. Like if you're feeding into what I'm doing, I can go ahead and respond. If you're not feeding into what I'm doing, then I have time for me not doing stuff. And that's when I'll respond. So it's been a like, hey, is this helping me in the direction that I want to go? If the answer is no, the answer is no. Like if you invite me to go out to lunch on, I don't know, a random day during the week, I'm more than likely going to say no unless we're meeting about real estate and getting something, involved in whatever I'm doing during that set amount of time. So it's become easy for me just because now I know what I want. I know the outcome that I want to achieve. And if you're not getting me in that direction, the answer is no. And it's strange because like I have stuff scheduled out. Like it's there. I know what I'm doing. You can ask me, hey, next week on this day, what are you doing? I can tell you that I'm going to be doing real estate work. I may not be able to tell you minute to minute what I'm doing, but I can tell you straight up, I don't have time for whatever that is because it's not this, right? The weekends, I leave that time open for the most part. So you can get a hold of me on the weekends if you need to. But even now, like if someone calls me right here, right now, you're SOL, bro. You're not getting an answer. I'm focused on something. Like even if it comes to
100%.
like personal friends, and like I reach out to you sometimes during the day because thoughts pop up and we have topics about this, but you don't respond, and I don't really care because I just messaged what I had in my brain. I'm not going to sit there and discuss it with you for 20 minutes, right? So I find it easy now that I've discovered what exactly it is that I need to do, right? I can't go out on a Friday night to go out, have beers and a drink or let's say Saturday night to have beers and a drink because I now know that Sunday morning I got to be up, I got to be here, I got to be focused on this. And if I go out and do that, it won't happen. So saying no to that now becomes easy because this podcast, what we're doing here, the conversations that we're trying to provide, the value that we're trying to provide is more important than me going out on a Saturday night and having fun. It's not that I'm not, want to, I do, and there will be a time for it. But right here, right now, this is my focus. This is the goal that I want to achieve.
100%, man. 100%. I'm right there with you. You don't have to respond to everything. I think there was another quote. Like I said, I'll fuck it up, but I can't remember what book it was from that I read, but it's always stuck with me since. And it was Napoleon back in the day. Obviously way back in the day, would get letters And he wouldn't respond to him for 3 weeks because most of the time the problems would then resolve themselves. So like
Yeah.
when it comes to work, like I've always managed a lot of associates, right? So when an associate would come to me and say, "Hey, I have a do you have a minute?" And if they said, "Do you have a minute?" Most of the time that meant that something was urgent, and that they needed to talk about it. So I would listen, and I'd listen to it, but I would judge their body language first of all. But the general premises of where I'm going with this is that a majority of people's problems get figured out. So sometimes people are like, "Hey, I need something. I need something." I'd be like, "Hey, we have scheduled time. Like if this is important." And what I classified as important was like a harassment issue, a safety issue, or a family personal issue. Then I have a minute. But a majority of times, what you would find out is that it was neither of the three. It was always something stupid, right? And what I would do is like, okay, man, if it wasn't, and I would define this for my team because I didn't want them to think I was an asshole and just like, no, I don't have time for you right now. So I defined it and I worked to build that culture. But like, hey, I'm tied up with something right now. My time is booked. I'm available at 3 o'clock. Right. And I have like what I called an open door policy. So you can come into my office after 3 o'clock and we can sit down and chat no matter what it was. They wanted to chat about, they needed some advice on a personal level. They had some shit going on at home. They had some shit going on with one of the managers in the store. Like I would just kind of chat, and I just called it like a coachable moment where we would just
Yeah.
coach and we would talk and we would reflect. But a lot of times, what I would find is that after 3 o'clock, I would go back to that person and be like, "Hey, Kevin, I know you said you needed to talk to me earlier, and it was an emergency. What was it? Because I haven't seen you yet." "Oh no, I already figured it out. Thanks." I'm like, "Well, what was it?" It was like, "Oh, it was like I needed to swap one of my days off." I'm like, great. Like those are one of those moments where you can go go talk to your direct supervisor and go get them
Yeah.
to handle it, because what they don't realize, and this is where teaching comes in hand a lot, but what they didn't realize, like, dude, like I have 55,000 things that I have to get done. You're going to come hit me up with something super easy because they're taking away from their buckets and putting it on my plate. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, this is up to you to manage and self regulate as well. So, like I said, I always have those certain qualities that, like, hey, is it a safety issue, a harassment issue, or do you have like an emergency going on, like 911? Oh, no, it can wait. All right. Come see me at 3 o'clock. And after I taught that, man, you would find that 90% of the problems would solve themselves or they would figure them out. And it just blew my mind, man. It absolutely blew my mind. And the reason why I tell that story is that for us, like that's why you have to learn how to say yes and no, and finding out how to teach that out. So that way you don't just take on and absorb, the 99 problems of a day that would then impact your schedule, right? And that's where that definition of urgent versus important comes into play. And there's
Yeah.
actually a matrix that's called the Eisenhower matrix, which was developed after Eisenhower essentially created this time management schedule that was broken into four segments into a conversation, and then it was then popularized and published by the seven traits of highly
Habits
effective
of highly
leaders.
effective people.
Yeah, so they then published it based off of Eisenhower's mentality, right? So I would implore you to look that up if you haven't. I know you have, but like for other people out there, like I would look it up right there and figure out how you can then define that. But
You
ultimately,
mind if
everything boils down to us.
you mind if I like explain it real quick to
Yeah,
people before we finish up here?
go
So
for
what
it.
he's talking about is literally just think of a cross, right? In this cross, you have four sections. There's category up top, category on the side. You have urgent, not urgent. You have important, not important. So in this top section here, you have urgent, important, important but not urgent, urgent, not important, not important, not urgent, right? And in the seven habits of highly effective people, essentially what it says is the tasks that are important and not urgent is where you make the most progress. Very specifically, they don't need to be handled right now, but they are important. Those are the tasks that most people put off. Those are the tasks that most people will succeed if they complete. A lot of the time, the urgent and important is SOS, we need to handle it right now, which is where a lot of time goes. But those things are kind of like we'll say HR issues, right? They don't move the needle forward very much, but they could put a big halt if they stop. So that's where a lot of people spend their time. Obviously, not urgent, not important, doesn't matter. Delegate that, send that off. There are things that are urgent but not important. That's fine. Delegate it off. Not urgent and important is where you need to spend the grand majority of the time. And that's what your schedule needs to be based off of. So look it up. There's a lot more detail to it, but essentially, things that are not urgent and important is what you need to be spending your time on, because that's what moves the needle. That's what makes you grow. That's what makes your business grow. That's what makes everything move forward. But finishing off here in terms of the actual schedule, making time for everything. Why should this matter to people? What's important about this? What's the takeaway?
My takeaways are obviously overall optimization. Like that's the result that we're looking for, right? But as I alluded to earlier, like some of the behaviors that you're going to have to change, that we've kind of discussed and laid out today, is like you're going to have a goal, and you have to have a long-term goal, but you need to have, like, a daily or a weekly goal to move the needle to that 1% better mentality. And Kevin said it earlier. We talked about Atomic Habits a little bit. The book, it's an easy read. It's very redundant. It discusses the same topics a lot throughout the entire book,
Yeah.
but you can read it pretty quickly, and you can understand that 1% better mentality will compound over the course of a year. And if you look it up, like, he has a chart that also discusses like what does 1% mean, and what are the effects of it, right? Where you're 37 and a half times better, from a percent base, in just 12 months. So, but you got to create the routines to get there. I think once you create the routines, you're going to have to get comfortable with failure. And the failure doesn't have to be catastrophic, but it's got to be, you're going to fail every day until you find what works for you. And again, you alluded to it earlier, Kevin. You discussed like the moving target. It's going to change, man. Like, life's going to throw you curveballs. There's that corny ass quote: everybody has a plan until life punches you in the face, right? So you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to remain flexible. And the time that you spent on that category may differ. You may have, you
Yeah.
said it earlier too, like you may have 2 hours blocked out, but maybe you had some shit happen that were urgent and important. But my goal would be, okay, I had 2 hours blocked out. I had some shit pop up today, but I'm still going to minimally spend 30 minutes having a topic of conversation with myself or with the individual, in that quadrant of time that I booked, just to maintain some consistency and some rhythm. And then, two more things left. You're going to have to find ways to maintain boundaries. And that goes back to that yes no conversation. Like, you can't say yes to everything, because when you do, you're saying no to something else. And whether it's your family, your friends, your wife, your career, your finances, or your own personal health, however you want to quantify that, you're going to have to maintain some boundaries. And that, again, is subject to change. But once you figure out those boundaries, and who you need to take care of and who doesn't matter, that's awesome. Then we're good to go. And then, last but not least, I would say, like, the overall benefit is stress management, man. Just stress management. When you look at, here's your blooper. When you look at stress management, right? I think you have to look at the impact of, when you start to create routines and rhythms, life is going to become a lot more optimized, which is going to free up a lot for you. And you're going to have a better quality of life. Those are my takes on it.
So, yeah, I mean, honestly, this should matter because it is how you achieve your goal. This is the methodic, like, thing that actually drives your results. So, one of the key takeaways that I wanted to have today is just kind of a summary review of what the hell you need to do to build a schedule. And that is, first and foremost, literally identify what it is that you want to achieve. Like, there's people that don't know what they want to achieve, and you can't build a schedule unless you know what you're working towards, because your schedule is literally how you're going to do what you need to do to achieve what you want to achieve. So identify what you want to achieve. That could be family time, that could be free time, that could be growing your business, that could be literally just fun activities. Like I need to have time for hobbies. Like I still play baseball, right? So I have Wednesdays and Sundays where I actually play baseball, or will in the next couple of months. So that time is dedicated for that. That's my me time. That's what I have fun. That's what I work on, right? So once you identify what you need to do, is when can you do it? There are obligations that we all have as humans, as people, that we need to do. We got to eat, we got to use the bathroom, there we have to work, we have to make money in some way, shape, or form. So what are the things that you have to do on a regular schedule, meaning set aside from Sunday to Saturday? If there's a thing that you need to do every Monday, if there's a thing that you need to do every single Tuesday, if there's a thing that you need to do every single Wednesday, write that down, note it, make it known. Even if it's the most simple, most basic thing, put it on your schedule. And then don't be scared to adjust that, because once you know what you have to do and you know the activities that you need to do to achieve whatever that result is, you have to put it as a priority and put it as a schedule. Anything that comes after that doesn't matter. Anything that distracts you from achieving that goal is going to become clear and is going to become more of a pain than anything, because now that you know, hey, I got to do this to achieve this result, it becomes a lot harder to not do the thing, because you now know the immediate repercussions that that's having, and it's taking away from your time. So if I don't go to the gym, I now know that I'm making an active decision to not get better that day. And it becomes very clear once you actually have that locked down and put into a schedule. And then if you don't achieve it, it's fine. Understand that it's not I have to do it every single day, but it's a how many days can I do it, right? If you ended up, the gym is just an easy example. If you have time built in 5 days a week to go to the gym and you do it 2, that's better than none, right? But next week, if you did it twice, try to go 3 times. If you did it 3 times, try to go 4 times, and just essentially build up until you actually get to where you want to go.
Couldn't agree more, man. Couldn't agree more. Listen, I love the topic of conversation today. I really did. Until next time, right? Maybe next time I won't have a fucked up camera that falls over in the middle at the end of the conversation in the peak climax. Damn it.
Bro.
But listen, man, I enjoyed the topic of conversation today. I look forward to the next chapter.
Yeah.
Hope you guys have a great fucking week.
See you guys.